Welcome to the first presentation of the lunch. I hope you have a well sleep. And I'm a little bit surprised to see so many people here in this small room listening to this very dry topic. And perhaps also what is the relationship between eIDAS and the PDF world. And I was asked from my other colleagues in the board to talk a little bit about this this relationship, because in the last months there were a lot of activity in EU and in the member states of the EU concerning configuring the new world for signatures, for electronic identities, for trust services, and so on. And therefore, there was also the question, what will this mean for PDF and for the use of PDF? And I will try to give you some information about this. I try to give some ideas and also my personal opinion what this will mean for PDF and for the PDF market. So first of all, what does eIDAS mean? Now, this will just fit. Otherwise, we have to change to the big room. Yeah. I just Googled this term this morning to see how popular this is, eIDAS, and I saw in Google we have about 73,000 hits. That means it is quite a normal topic, so not very popular in terms of Google, but for a lot of people, as I know in our market share, it's very important, because behind eIDAS there is the intention of the EU to consolidate all eID services and trust services throughout Europe. It means to leave this scheme where every country makes its own regulations for defining what is an advanced signature, what is a qualified electronic signature, or to define their own national eID service. And then say, okay, now we are waiting for the people to use them in daily life, but then recognizing, okay, the use and the value of this eID service is not so high that the people just say, oh yeah, fine, we will do this. But they sit there and say, okay, if I have this limitation, that limitation, if I want to use this in another country in EU, it doesn't work. What can we do? And this was one of the intentions of the EU to start with a new regulation. And eIDAS is the acronym for Electronic Identification and Trust Services. It's a regulation from the EU, relatively new, was made last year on 23rd of July, was decided within the Council and the Parliament. And it was officially published in the official media of the EU in August. And it is a very specific thing, because it overrules any national legal regulations. That means if you have in a EU state, for example in Germany, you have a signature law and a so-called Signaturverordnung. That means so-called implementing acts for this signature law, and there they have ruled very specifically what is meant by an electronic signature, by a qualified electronic signature, and by a qualified electronic certificate. And this is in law for Germany, but with this regulation of the EU. This is overruled, so it doesn't is in active anymore. There is a thing you have to know about this, not with the 28th of August last year, that it started already in every country, but the EU says, okay, you have some more months' time in your member state to implement this regulation into your national scheme. Especially they have said you have 1 year for defining the very specific regulations, because this EU regulations is on a very high level. So you can say this is in a flight altitude of about 10,000 feet. And if you want to go down and you want to speak to a software developer and to explain him how to do this in software or in applications, then you need a very more specific regulation. These so-called implementing acts are now defined in Brussels and within the member states, and there is also a deadline at end of July this year, 2015, where these implementing acts should be finished for the first step. And then there is another 1 year time period until mid of 2016, where these implementing acts should be then took into action. That means we really have then at the beginning, mid of 2016, a unified regulation for electronic signatures throughout Europe. So EU, and just to come to the key question, why is eIDAS relevant to PDF? Because in eIDAS you will not find directly in the moment any word about PDF. There the people talk about electronic identities, about signatures, about trust, electronic trust, and so on, but there is no word about PDF. And why should this affect PDF? You have to take into account that if you look at the signature market and eIDAS, you can state that the vast majority of all electronically signed documents are PDF documents. If you talk to an CA or trust center and ask them what are normally the types of documents which are signed with your certificates and so on, they will say to you normally more than 90% is PDF. There are no hard figures about this, so there have been no made any statistics about that. But if the experience shows us that, from my opinion, more than 90% of all signed documents, legally signed documents, are PDF documents. That means if you talk about electronic signatures and electronic documents, you also have to talk about PDF. This is the relationship by this. The other interesting point is that the PDF is, we have a lot of ISO standards. You know about them. This is also the base of our PDF days here, where we talk about PDF 1.2, 1.0, PDF 2, PDF A, PDF UA, and so on. We have ISO standards, and in some of these ISO standards, you have also a very clear definition how to implement an electronic signature inside of a PDF document. As you normally know, you can sign every data with electronic signatures. So for that you need also only a so-called eIDAS compliant signature. That means a separate file which contains a signature about your data. But PDF is one of the very few document formats which has a very dedicated specification about how to implement inside of a PDF an electronic signature. These specifications are quite old, and in the last years have been more in detail specified by so-called ETSI standards. I will show this in a few moments, and where you can see very clearly how to implement such type, and not only simple electronic signatures, that means just for signing the document, but also for multiple signatures, for signatures with timestamps, for long-term valid signatures, and so on. All this stuff is specified. Therefore, PDF is a very signature-like standard. As I said, ETSI, the European Standard Organization, has published appropriate standards for signing PDF. They are shortly called eIDAS for PDF advanced digital electronic signatures, and beside other standards from ETSI like eIDAS and CADAS. And they really have written this standard specifically for PDF. For example, in the upcoming PDF2 standard, we will face, I think, end of this year, beginning next year by ISO. You will see that they make explicit references to this ETSI standard. In former times, it has not been the case. That means, so for example, if you look at PDF 1.0, there has been no mentioning of ETSI standards, but with the upcoming PDF2 standard, you will see these references. And the other thing is that eIDAS wants to claim an electronic digital market everywhere. That means that doesn't depend on which platform, on which media you are running. And everywhere you should be able to sign, to make your electronic identification and so on. And therefore, for this, to achieve this goal, you need a so-called ubiquitous format, like in this case, PDF. That means this is the, in also my opinion, the relationship between eIDAS and PDF. That means if you want to talk about a single digital market in Europe for exchange of electronic documents which are signed and so on, you also need to talk about PDF, because only PDF will give you this flexibility and this reliance on standards compared to other document formats. As I said, legally binding electronic signatures. You can have very different kinds of electronic signatures and so on, but if I look specifically to the legally binding electronic signatures, that means we have the same character than a handwritten signature on a contract or on another piece of paper, then you have to specifically look at these QES, these qualified electronic signatures. And despite the EU directive of 1999, where they already have stated that we have a common understanding of electronic signatures and their trust levels in Europe, we have seen that it's not the case. That we have national realms. That means every member state in Europe has implemented a different kind of these so-called legally binding electronic signatures. They have interpreted this on their own way, which led to the problem that if you sign a document in Germany following the German interpretation and the German law for qualified electronic signatures, and you send this document to somebody in France or in Italy, and you say to them, okay, this is legally binding, you can prove this in your own country with your own tools and so on, with their own infrastructure, you will see it's not right, because the other side will then use their own tools, which are common in their member state, with their own infrastructure for certificate chains and so on, and they will see, oh, there is not the green mark on the document. Because in interpretation, what is qualified and so on is different between most of the countries in the EU. And this is not very not very achievable situation. Yes?
Just a short question. Does this apply to the signature itself or to PDF, or a sign, digitally signed PDF?
To the signature. To the signature. The way a PDF is signed is not specified by every member state. Also, there are some member states, for example, Austria, who have developed an own type of signature of a PDF signature. For example, to interpret this in a legally binding way, you need a specific handler, a software handler, which is which then you can plug into your, for example, Adobe Reader or other tools. So with normal standard reader, or so you cannot interpret this type of signature in Austria. This was not done by just because they want to be funny and say, oh, we will invent our own scheme, but because they had the idea to be very close and to the paper line, and then to have a thing where, for example, you can prove an electronic signature even if the document, of the PDF document, is printed out. So that you can print out a signed document to paper and then scan the signature, which is an hex string, printed out on the paper back again, and prove whether this printout is legally binding. This was the reason why they have invented this very specific way of doing it. But now, in our times, they also have changed this, and then the new regulations in Austria, for example, they also say, okay, we still keep this for historical reasons, but in the next months, we really change our official systems to be compliant with ETSI standards, and this means with eIDAS and so on. Therefore, the way of signing such documents is the same in this country than, for example, in Germany, France, or Netherlands. But the thing I want to head through is that the interpretation, what is a qualified electronic certificate or electronic signature, is really different. And therefore, you either need a software who is capable to really interpret every national regulation and to have all national root certificates in a trusted store, or, yeah, you are lost. Because there is no unique root, for example, of trust for EU. Not now, and also not in the future. The EU, the eIDAS regulation, for example, will not foresee a central trust service for all Europe, which is, for example, run by the EU. It still says, okay, every member state has their own scheme, but we will deliver you a sort of list where all these roots are put together, assembled, and then you can download this list from one point, and then you can use this list to adopt to every member state when you want to prove whether an electronic signature is valid or not. The first steps when the work started with the eIDAS, there was the hope that the EU would say, okay, we are the main institution in Europe, and we will build up a common trust service in infrastructure in Europe, and there is one European CA which gives you these certificates, which, for example, approves the national ones. But in the end, as quite often in EU, the national, I should say, the national algorithms, they were stronger than the common sense of such a way, and there was no budget, I say, from the EU available to really build up such an infrastructure and to run it. Because the member states say, oh, we have already built this up in our country. Why should we spend another money in EU? This was the reason why. But this makes it a little bit more complicated for the software, but it will still work, we think, in the future. Okay, different signing, e-validation schemes. Next thing is, if you talk about eIDAS, you not only talk about signing, but also about electronic identification. So for example, as you know, every country here has a different scheme of this. So there is a Belgium ID card, a German eID card, the Lettish one. In France, there is, I think, in the moment, not an ID card available, as far as I know. And there are other countries, for example, in the Netherlands, they use this, how is it called? This, not my ID. I don't remember the
it's
Dutch.
Not a card.
Yeah, it's not a card. It's a
DigiD.
yeah.
Digital ID, but it's
DigiD. Okay. So the software way. And if you have already worked in this sector, for example, in the eID sector in Germany, for implementing the German eID card, and then to compare this technology with the DigID or the DigiD in Netherlands, it's very, very different. And to bring this together and to say this is in a comparable level of trust is very hard. And therefore, there was also the motivation for EU to harmonize this and to say, okay, we will have a common eID understanding and implementation in EU in the next, I think now we go to 2015 and until 2018. Then it should be possible, for example, to use your Belgian eID card and to go to a German public administration office and, for example, to ask for or to apply for any official regulation. For example, if you want to have an approval to start your own business here in Germany, you have to fill out such a form and you normally to have to sign it. And then in the future, it should be possible that you can even do this in Germany with a foreign eID card or eID token or eID, electronic identity. This will force the public administrations in Europe, in all other countries, to invest some money in the next years. And in the moment, they don't really know how to manage this. Because for them, 2018 is very short. It's not like for us that we say, okay, 3 years, much time. No. If you really have to cope with the problem, to deal with 28 different schemes of eID, and you are obliged to accept them in your own country, then it can be a real hard business. Okay. As I said, national realms, so that means everybody is doing it in a different way. And the EU anticipated what we wanted to achieve was that we don't want to remove these difficulties of cross-border exchange of qualified electronic signatures, that means legally binding ones. There is not so much a problem of cross-border exchange of advanced signed electronic documents, because to sign a PDF, for example, with an advanced electronic certificate, there are some common means which can give you the guarantee that this document can be validated in every country in EU and also in every country over the world. One example, for example, is if you take a certificate for signing, which is derived from an CA listed within the Adobe Trust List, which is part of every Adobe Reader or Adobe Acrobat or other Adobe product. Then you can be sure that this document can be validated all over the world if you use an Adobe Reader. And as most of the people have such tools available, this is a very good scheme to use this. But only if, as I said, if the certificate you are using is derived from one of the roots listed within the AATL. And the idea behind eIDAS is more or less the same for the qualified way, that they say, okay, there will be such a trust list for all roots within Europe. And if the signing certificate is derived from such a certificate within this trust list, then your application, which follows eIDAS, should then give you a positive result when validating such a signature. Okay. One validation schema. Right, the actual situation in Germany just before eIDAS, that means now, is that we still rely in our legal regulation on the Directive 1999 of the EU. most of the text of these regulation from the EU is influenced by the German legislation from that time. And we have this national law in Germany, so-called signature law or basic law, and additional implementing acts called Signaturverordnung. And this rules here in Germany specific services, especially how to deal with qualified electronic signatures, with qualified timestamps, and also with the renewal of qualified electronic signatures. This is these services are regulated. Other trust services are not regulated. There is no regulation how to deal, for example, with the validation. It's very interesting. To apply such a signature, yes, it's regulated very specifically. But how to validate, not in the same way. The result of this regulation, especially in Germany, was that we have in Germany only a qualified electronic signatures with smart cards. There is no other qualified electronic signature possible in the moment. One can think about such a scheme, but actually we don't see this in the market. Only qualified electronic signatures with smart card. That means you cannot implement any business processes where you want, for example, to rely on your smartphone as a security token, because this will not pass the regulation in Germany for legally binding signatures. And we also have only these QES for natural persons. That means only real people can have such a certificate. I cannot make such a certificate, for example, for an institution, for a company, for an organization. And there are a lot of documents within your company which would be very much sufficient if you would sign it in the name of the company or on behalf of the company and not on behalf of a very specific person, which could leave, for example, the company 2 weeks later after the signing. And this was also a reason why there was a lack of regulation, especially in Germany in this way. This will change with the eIDAS, because there we now know about a thing which is called seal, which is the same than a normal qualified electronic certificate, but for organizations, for legal entities, and not for natural persons. Okay, the other thing was that the national root certificate for legally binding electronic signatures from the BNetzA was not contained within the browser list, or the member in the browser list, or in the AATL of Adobe. And this led to these problems I have mentioned to you about when you want to exchange such a document cross-border to other countries or to other persons. And we have a very specific validation schema, how to validate such a signature in Germany, which is not the same in detail than, for example, in implementations of other countries, or in this way of Adobe Reader would validate such a signature. This led to a very closed market in Germany, where we had the situation that there have been some companies which deliver the software specifically for Germany. This was fine on one side, but on the other side, if you implemented these very specific things for Germany, you will not be able to have the same, just move to another country and run there, because then you have to go one step back and implement the specific scheme for this country again. Okay, the eIDAS regulation has 3 parts. First part is the mutual recognition of e-identification. This very short sentence means a lot of invest for the public administration the next years, and they don't really know how to manage this. Then the next one is the extended supervision of certification services providers and trust service providers. That means that in the future, when this regulation is really active, it should not be matter whether you have a certificate from a German CA in Germany, or from a French or Belgium or Dutch or Italian CA. even for legally binding certificates. In the moment, this is not possible. In the moment, you can only own or buy a certificate for legally binding signing from a German CA. It's not possible to buy it from a Belgian one, for example. In the future, when this is active, you're free. That means you can go for example, to a Polish CA and buy a certificate for qualified electronic signing. And to achieve this, the EU said, okay, if we want to allow for this free market, we also have to have the same standard of supervision of all CAs, of all trust service providers. That means we first have to establish an auditing scheme which allows for us to say, okay, if you have a certification as a trust service provider in one country, this certification has the same type of quality than the certification in another country. This sounds easy, but it's hard to achieve because to compare the quality of such certifications is not very easy. But this was one of the reasons, and we saw that in the future we expect that there will be perhaps 3 or 4 institutions all over Europe who will give you such a certificate for trust services. That means something like the TÜV in Germany will then also approve other CAs all over Europe. That we don't expect that in the future there will be about 20 or 30 different supervision bodies, but this will consolidate to only a few, and they will then make the audits of all these trust service providers or certification service providers. The other thing is that we have a bigger set of electronic trust services. That means not only electronic signatures or timestamping, but also these so-called electronic seals, which is the same than electronic signatures, but from our organizations and not from natural persons. And we have this type of registered delivery service. This is another word for products like the email or e-post in Germany, where you have this signed the delivery service for email between 2 parties, and this should also work in the future cross-border. In the moment, mostly you can use this within one country, but to have this cross-border through Europe, it's still a hard time, and they are working on this, and some of these companies who are producing such registered delivery services have promised that in the next months they are able to also to have this running throughout a couple of countries in Germany. One of the last steps was the website authentication. That means a whole complex of SSL certificates. This was a long discussion within the EU how to regulate this, because the market for SSL certificates is mostly owned by American companies, and there is only a small market share left for the Europeans. And this was also then a reason to say for the EU, okay, we should push more the European ideas, the European market, and therefore also make some regulations on how to deliver SSL certificates, to give European companies and trust centers a chance to compete within this worldwide market. And the last but not least is the electronic documents. In this way, one need to understand also, for example, how to deal with secure PDF. But this point, electronic documents, is should I say, it's just in the regulation without any further clarification. Nobody really knows about this. What does this mean? It was just there, and it was in some of the audits of the regulation. A lot of people said, okay, we know this is important, but we don't really know what we understand with this point. So as long as we are not able to clarify this, we should skip it. But then it made all the rounds through the audit, through the parliament, the council, and in the end it was still left in the regulation, and still nobody knows about this, how to deal with this. Okay. Electronic signature and seals, you see here non-discrimination as evidence in legal proceedings. That is a very common thing. That means if you sign your electronic document with an electronic signature, you should not be you should not have a discrimination on court if you bring such a document in as evidence. That means for a legal effect, only for natural persons, and the e-seal only for legal entities, and so on, and recognition in all member states for the electronic signature and the seal. This is that the thing. The timestamp is analogous. That means you have the accuracy of the time and date it indicates, and it has been delivered. It should be delivered by such a trust service provider. And this is also a qualified service, and so on. Technically, it's done with an eIDAS, that means an advanced electronic signature, or sealed with an eIDAS seal, together with the time which has been derived from an accurate time source. This is common and not very new thing. And electronic documents, I said to you, this is a very generic description. You will see this in the handouts. Just to give you an impression about the work which is done in the moment, we have here the legal framework which has been finished last year and published. And by this, we have this section 3, trust services. And this section 3, chapter 3 has some sections. And these sections are then divided up into articles, and every article has now references to so-called implementing acts. And the most interesting thing for companies dealing with implementing eIDAS compliant products is not the legal framework here, but these implementing acts, because in these implementing acts there are the real specification how to implement this, how to do this, how is this understood. And also in this implementing acts you have all the references to the underlying technical framework. The technical framework is more or less exclusively given by ETSI standards, and you have a lot of these ETSI standards, about 20 or 25 these ETSI standards which are referenced by these implementing acts, which underlie all these implementations. Just to give you a more chaotic picture how this standardization works, this is one of the basic diagrams. You should not understand the diagram. I think nobody in EU understands this diagram, but they are still working on this, and to end up with a consistent set of standards within the EU. So the areas for standardization is shortly this. You have these trust service status list providers. This is the list where all these national routes are contained within, and the compliant products in the future will reference for validation of a signature to this trust service status list. For example, as far as I know, Adobe will also include this trust service status list in the next generation of products, so that you are able to use this eIDAS scheme for signing and validation even with the Adobe products. This is a very interesting idea that especially an American company is working very actively within the European standardization communities. So Adobe is one of the active members within ETSI, and therefore you can expect that the implementation they are doing is also very close to these standards. Okay, just to skip this, this is the references to the ETSI standards I mentioned for PADAS. Yeah, okay, this is a timeline. We had 2013 entry into force of the regulation. The application of rules for the trust services will start in mid of 2016, that means mid of next year. Then every national CA who wants to play in the game of qualified trust service providers has to be compliant with this eIDAS regulation. And for the public administration, the mandatory recognition of eIDs from foreign countries or the other member states will take in effect in mid of 2018. Okay, this is I can skip. One, I think in interesting part, let me add this because before I come to the end, is one type of signature procedure is coming in, is getting more and more popular due to these eIDAS. This was not possible in the past because due to the national regulations and the understanding of how to keep the private key under your control, you were not able to legally sign a PDF document with a server-side signature. That means you don't apply the signature directly under your physical control with a smart card, but to have this done on a server, on a computing center, which is secured and so on. And you only make a sort of identification of yourself against this computing center and then let the document be signed within the computing center. This is the so-called remote signing or server-side signing. And this change in understanding not to use a token on your own directly, but to have this token remotely situated in a computing center was done by this very small formulation, this very small sentence to say use under his or her sole control and not under he has to possess this physically. In the former times it was you have to possess it physically. Now in the future it is under your sole control. And what this means says to you, you only need to have sort of a strong identification of yourself against this service, and then you can start the service on the server side. Okay, I will come to the end, and I think this eIDAS regulation will have some very massive change in the trust service market in Europe, because we have then, I think, beginning mid of 2016, the situation that we have not only some national trust centers, but a couple of European trust centers. And they are all operating in all member states of the EU. This, for example, especially in Germany, there are some trust centers who stopped operation last year because they said, okay, they will not start this process of auditing and certification because it's too expensive compared to the earnings you can expect, and therefore they stopped operation. This will happen also in other countries because I think the process to be compliant with this regulation in the future is not very cheap. Yeah, okay, I said qualification requirements be a clear risk to exclude SMEs from becoming a TSP. Yes, it is not a cheap process, and I cannot see the chance for a SME to easily become such a TSP in the future within Europe. Signing documents will mostly have a PDF, sure, with signature and electronic seals. And as I already said, trustable solutions will have to follow the eIDAS regulation and so on. And by this, I would finish this excursion to eIDAS and signature and would say thank you to you. And I hope that you are not too slept too deeply, and you have gotten some information about this very dry topic. Okay, thank you.